Great. Thank you all for being here. Um, as you can see, we have a good wide range of different things that people did during their time off and different amounts of time. I just want to say, like, right off the bat, gap years might not be for everyone. It's definitely a personal choice, and I know not everyone takes time off. Some people go straight through. I like the point of this session is to talk more about people who did take gap years and kind of what you can do during that time. But we're also happy to answer questions about like why we chose to take gap years, if we wish we did again, regret it, anything like that. So any questions that you have are totally fine and relevant, but just letting you know we kind of have a skewed group of people here who all took time off. So I personally am a huge proponent of gap years. I'm really grateful that I took the time that I did. I think a lot of people think that taking time off is mainly to improve your application, and that's definitely true. But I also think it's super important to have that time to kind of unwind, not be a student, and get to really reflect on how you got to this point and prepare yourself mentally and emotionally for med school, because as I'm sure you all know, burnout is a huge issue in medicine. And I think for me personally, I'm only a couple months into it, but I know that I'm glad that I had that time off to kind of reset and get ready for med school, because it's pretty much all in once you're in it and there's no looking back. So I'm glad that I had that time to myself to kind of travel, see family, work in non-medical jobs, and just kind of get to live a normal life for a little while. So I definitely am a huge advocate for gap years. But we're here to answer any questions you might have if people are considering and still in the decision-making process in terms of their timeline. So I think Alex has some kind of pre-submitted questions if we want to start going through those, and then we can open it up to everybody that's here.
Yeah, so our first question of the night um, is I'm gonna formulate the question that was submitted just today. I'm currently deciding between pursuing a 1 year master's program in a lab I'm in or considering a clinical research position. I think they're trying to navigate between deciding between the two. So if anybody wants to kick off, taking a stab at this one first.
I would say just for the clinical research aspect, because that's sort of where the bulk of my gap year experiences came through, is to really pay attention and try to discern what that clinical research job is going to entail. And the reason why I say this is clinical research is not the same landscape as bench research, where when you get a bench research position, you'll sort of have your duties laid out for you. You know what your day-to-day is going to be like, and you sort of know what you're going to gain from that experience from the get-go. Whereas clinical research positions vary super widely. So when I was applying for clinical research back when I graduated, there was two positions seemed really similar on paper, but the more I investigated, the more I learned that one of the positions was hiring someone to basically just put data into an Excel document 8 hours a day. And the job that I ended up doing was a lot more hands-on. So I was working directly with doctors. I was conducting my own patient visits with patients, which really helped that clinical competence. I learned how to work with pharmacists, work with nurses, work with mid-level providers. So just because it's clinical research doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to gain that clinical component. And I do think, like someone else had mentioned, that clinical component or that experience really, really helped me not only in my interviews, but also in medical school so far. So if you are debating between clinical research, be really, really picky and do your research in terms of figuring out what that position is going to entail.
I definitely agree. And one thing I'll just piggyback off of that is um, you define what you want out of that position. So if you're looking for, have those expectations, those conversations early, like even from the moment you interview. Sometimes I know it can be tough. Like if you're looking to get publications in that time period, which if you are, that's fine. If not, you don't have to be. But if you are looking for that, make sure you make it known, right? Because if you get there and you agree to something and now you are just inputting data or stuff like that and you are not going to necessarily be involved in that process, then you may not feel that your time was worth it. And so it's a time relationship and realizing that whoever you talk to, it's a beneficial relationship that has to mutually benefit both parties.
I would also add, if you're looking at something like a master's program, a lot of like the reason why people do those types of programs is to kind of prove to medical schools that they can handle the academics of medical school. So if that's something that like is might be a weakness on your application or something like that, then that's a good idea. If it's something that you're interested in, go for it. I think a lot of people tend to choose things to do during their gap years that they might not necessarily enjoy that much, but they think it looks good on paper. And while that is important to work on your application, if you're going to be miserable in whatever you're choosing, it's honestly not worth it. These are the last like completely flexible years that you're going to have, so I would take that opportunity to do something that you're genuinely going to enjoy and be able to speak passionately about during your interviews as well. But if that's something that you're interested in and you think it's an area of weakness in your application, then I think kind of thinking about where you have room for improvement is really important, but also making sure that it's something that you're actually going to be interested in and enjoy.
I'll also throw out too, I did my clinical research experience at Northwestern, which is a huge hospital downtown Chicago. As you can imagine, it's a huge academic center. So my boss would get like hundreds of applications all the time. And so throughout my time there, I also learned of different ways to phrase things or different skills to highlight on your CV or resume. So if you are considering clinical research, please reach out to me. I'd love to like read through your CVs or your resumes to just sort of give you tips and tricks, which might push you a little bit higher up on the priority list for someone that might be looking at your CV.
And just to echo what Juliana was saying, remember that doing something that will make you happy during that time period will make sure that you are also doing it better, right? Like, yes, you want to be productive in your gap years, but if you do that master's program and you don't succeed, it also shows, right? Like these are things that track with you that you are going to be submitting. So necessarily, if it's not a gap and it's not going to be something you want to do, getting the extra degree isn't necessary if you don't want to do it. It actually may hurt you more in the likely if you do poorly during that time period. So just remember those things while you're doing that. Any more on that question, or should we move on to question two?
Sorry, I have one more thing to add. I'm so sorry. This is more on like the
No problem.
master's aspect. This is more on like the master's aspect of it. Really do your research on master's programs. They're popping up pretty frequently now, and a lot of them don't have the best track record in terms of actually getting people matriculated into medical school. Like the program that I'm part of, my medical school program does have a master's program, and I think it has about 150 students, and a wide variety of those students don't end up matriculating. So when I was looking for a master's program, I knew that a master's program was right for me to begin with, but I wanted to really do a program that showed success. So I ended up doing my master's program at my undergrad, which is Loyola back in Chicago, which has about a 98% matriculation rate within 2 years. So that was pretty impressive to me. I knew that the program had a really nice track record. So if you are thinking about a master's program, especially because they can be pretty expensive, like over $50,000, really, really do your research and make sure it's not a haphazard decision, because you're putting your money and your hopes into this program to try to help you prepare for medical school. So you want to make sure that they have the tools, the staff, the faculty, and whatever other resources you need based on a demonstrable history of getting people into medical school. So just really, really make sure you do research on that as well.
I think Emily may have something to say.
Yeah, just to add on, make sure to be careful. Like, I would assume everyone here, medicine is your goal, but I know when I was looking at special master's programs, they would say like, oh, 98% success rates, but they didn't disclose that, some of those students were applying to dental school or PA school. Also, it's been a while since I've been in that space of applying, but if bridge programs are still a thing, that is a really good option, especially if they offer some sort of like conditional acceptance or guaranteed acceptance. Like if you can enter that program and work hard and do well, like you've sealed your envelope, and you've just got to get through, that hard part of doing well in that program. And I think that would take off some anxiety on the back end. So Just do
No,
your research. I recommend making like a Word document or an Excel document of like the pros and the cons, you know, and just making sure to do a good comparison when you're looking at S&Ps.
yes, for sure. I will definitely say that as someone who takes classes with our master's students, it is they are tend to be a little bit more stressed out because some of them do have higher requirements. I know ours, you do get conditional interviews, and I think, but they have to get all A's. So like, know what those like secret requirements are, before you commit, because at the end of the day, remember that every institution is still a financial, like they're looking for financial gain. And these master's programs are a financial gain for them, no matter what. Yes, they want to say, like, oh, we have matriculants that are doing stuff, but they will pressure you to just getting a job or something like that. And that says placement rate. And so that to them, that's their sell. We all, I'm sure, if you guys have signed up for AMCAS, get a million emails from different institutions pushing some type of program towards you because they're financially gaining. So remember that in the back of your head while you're doing your research. Um, and remember, you have mentors who are here to help you, guide you through. A lot of us will either know somebody who's done something like that, or we will also help look into things more. So I think we'll go to question 2 now. And then question 2 is it worth taking a gap year? What if life gets in the way within your gap year? How can you make sure to have a productive gap year? So I think we'll try and break that down in 3 different parts. So first, we can start having some mentors talk about did they feel it was worth taking their gap year?
I mean, I can start with that one and definitely say yes, in a lot of ways. I mean, yeah, I could go pretty broad with why it was worth it. I mean, a couple things for me, like you guys just talked a lot about master's programs, and again, if that's what you need, then absolutely go do that. Like if that's where your weakness is in your application. But myself, like I was actually like I declined. I looked into that, and again, I wasn't a candidate who my application that wouldn't necessarily have benefited from a master's program. So I decided to do more clinical approach. And for me, I just some of the big things I learned from working clinically, really like experience. So Luigi kind of mentioned that too. There's a lot of things you learn in the hospital that you don't necessarily learn in medical school, and it's hard to know what those things are until you actually just go do it. So that's definitely a big thing. Another thing we kind of touched on, but I will just briefly mention it again. It's not the end all be all, but we kind of mentioned like the cost of master's programs, and just in general, I'll speak to understanding, like just gaining financial literacy was something that I learned a lot about during my gap years. Once you leave college, we kind of talked about you're getting out of that academic bubble we've been in for 18 years or whatever it was, 22 years of our lives. So you start to see the real world. You start to understand, oh wow, this money I have to pay back. And I think it gave me a lot more perspective going into medical school. Like, okay, I know how much, I know what I'm doing to myself here. I know how much how much debt I'm accruing. So I'll touch on that too. Like again, something to consider with master's programs, but just in general, building like those kind of good financial habits, and just learning other life skills besides medicine.
I actually second a lot of what was said because, yeah, when I first was considering about getting a gap year, it wasn't because I was considering it, it's because I needed to retake the MCAT. And I was like, oh, I don't want to take it because a lot of doctors previously will tell you what's the point. Because back in that time, you could easily get in straight in. Now it's getting much more competitive. It's going to get a lot more competitive for DO programs as well. Like the requirements for DOs are just going to become the same as what it is currently for MDs in the next 4 years. So anyone I mentor, I'm like, oh man, it's going to get tough. And so you need to take gap years because, first of all, so I had a lot of clinical experience, similar to what Luigi was saying, where you're working with patients, with pharmacies, you'll be able to know how to talk to people in a different way. So when it came time where I was like learning about these skills, it really helped when it came time for my OSCEs. OSCEs are your standardized patient encounters that you have. where you're really trying to figure out, okay, here's how do I approach like taking a history in a specific amount of time. A lot of my peers who did not have that experience or went straight into medical school, they had to take a lot more time to figure out how to do it. Whereas those who had the experience are like, okay, this piece of case, I can study my other things that are much more important and need more time when it comes to like lectures. So yes, it is incredibly worth it to take it because you're learning skills that will not only help you when you're in medical school, but when it comes to rotations, you get more comfortable how to talk to a doctor, how to talk to a patient, how to talk to a mid-level provider. These like when a lot of patients, there's some patients that were previous retired physicians, and one of them came up to me and he was like, "Yeah, your 2 years are just like a 2-year residency in ophthalmology." And he kind of looked at the work. He's like, when you get that real life work of working full-time medicine, you're not only preparing yourself for a better application, you're preparing yourself for being able to be more comfortable in your rotation position. And that's what matters. It's not about trying to get the highest grade in your classes for medical school. It's about rounding out your application and showing your rotation, whoever you're going to be rotating under, that you deserve a spot in a medical team, not at just a medical school. So there's some like long-term things that apply with gap years where, yeah, you're taking some time where you're not immediately going into medical school, but you're really figuring out the long-term benefits of here's what I'm going to gain. That's not going to help me just get into medical school. It's get into a residency, get me a better job, get me better rapport with other doctors. Because at the end of the day, networking is a huge aspect of medical school that I think in the pre-med world is incredibly underemphasized. So yes, please take a gap year. It's going to help you a lot if you use it well. That's the caveat, using it well and using it right.
I want to echo on a point that I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead. I'll go after you.
Okay. I just wanted to echo on the point that Abraham said, which I feel like is not realized enough by pre-med students, and that's about DO programs. So definitely, and again, I'm very realistic about DO programs in the United States. It was a lot and still is relatively a little bit easier. This was true maybe 10, 15 years ago to get into a DO program. For my class specifically in the landscape of 2022 moving forward, my class is about 450 people spread across 2 campuses. And for my matriculant year, we had about 21,000 applications. So you can do the math. It's a very competitive process, even though the statistics might be a little bit lower. So don't fall into the illusion that just because a school might have lower statistics for entrance necessarily means that it's easier to get into, because the truth of the matter, getting into medical school is difficult no matter what program you go to. So really be realistic when it comes to those kinds of things. The second thing I just wanted to mention really quickly is I did have a lot of really good experiences during my gap years, which were formative to me wanting to pursue becoming a physician outside of anything else, but really be introspective about you want to pursue medicine as a physician. The reason why I say this is because I feel like as pre-meds in general, we have this notion of wanting to become a physician ever since we were little kids. Like I remember my 8th grade yearbook literally says I'm going to become a doctor and what do you want to be when you grow up? But it's very difficult to get an actual grasp on the sacrifices that you need to make in medical school and as a doctor, and to realize how unrelenting the field of medicine can be, especially if you don't have a sound support system or the best coping mechanisms. So gap years are also very, very important and crucial for developing those if you don't have that necessarily as a strong suit. So, at the end of the day, you're the one going to medical school, not your parents, not your family, not your friends, not the doctors you work with. So you really need to make sure that you are going to medical school for the right reasons and that you have the support system and the coping mechanisms to deal with the challenges that medical school is indefinitely going to throw at you no matter where you go. So that's another thing as well.
Yeah, just to add on what you're saying, actually, Luigi, that taking a gap year for other people outside, it doesn't seem like the right step to do. Personally, for me, I studied nursing for up until like 2019 and dropped out on my final year when I had to do my honors because like everyone else, maybe when I was a kid, I wanted to be a doctor. And when I started going into wards and being exposed to the OSCEs that Abraham is talking about, I definitely knew that's what I wanted to do, right? But in order for me to get there back at home, I would have to finish my honors, I would have to do my practicals and stuff like that. So I dropped out to take that gap year and join the October or late stage of medicine or late stage semester here in China. And in that period, I did as much as I could to explore and to self-introspect that this is something I really wanted to do. And since it's going to be outside of my country, because I was born in one small town in Umtata, and I grew up there. I went into my first college or university experience there. So I'd never really been outside of Umtata, let alone South Africa, my country. So I came here to China to study Chinese or Mandarin for like 6 months, and to be sure that this is what I want to do. I want to be outside and to study medicine and to be in an environment that I've never been in before, to experience that cultural shock. And then when I went back, waiting for the semester to start, I started doing things outside of medicine, where I was mentoring high schoolers. I was judging science expos that I was part of when I was younger, and kind of visiting my high school and seeing what they would need or whatever the case may be. But in that gap year, my parents were not proud of the fact that, one, I dropped out of something I was not enjoying anymore, because there was like literally 1 year left of my honors being finished. And that whole pressure of, okay, after I take my gap year, I'll have to do 6 years of medicine. And by the time I'm done studying, I would have been studying for 9 years and all of that. But that gap year for me made me understand that with outside pressures and everything, I know who I am within that gap year, or I know what I want. And I'm not in that role where I'm from nursing and I'm studying this and I'm studying that and not taking a break, or not taking the time to reflect on what I already know and what I've gone through and what I will be doing, and the consistency and the discipline that I will need to teach myself and go through in order for me to finish medical school. And to be quite honest with you, I don't know about other people, I don't think I was ready for the level of discipline, or I hadn't self-introspected when I was younger and I was doing nursing. And I think I really needed to go through that and to go through a gap year where I pause and stop and look at where I am now. Because now it's quite easier to reevaluate, because like you had said, Juliana, in the beginning, I forgot the word now, but when you're really tired from studying, and I forgot the word that you said just now, that, but burnout, yes, that's the word I forgot, yes. When you're going through a burnout, I don't know how I would have handled it if I hadn't taken a gap year to reflect. Like you had said, like that gap year does that for you. And you kind of understand that your timeline is your timeline. For me, it will take 9 years for me to finish this whole thing. But that gap year and that level of growth that I needed to go through helped me right now to be more disciplined and to understand why I'm here and what I'm doing this for. Because having the passion for it is not enough. You can passionately want to be a doctor and stuff, but the work that you have to put in, you have to be able to reintrospect. So I am for gap years, but you must want to do a gap year. You must want to use it for something that's better, to like self-introspect and stuff. Because the other thing is, you only really realize the impact of a gap year in hindsight. It's not like you go through a gap year and every day you're like, I'm self-discovering and I'm self-introspecting. Today I'm going to write a journal or something. Because sometimes that gap year is filled with frustrations of time. Am I wasting time or not? What am I doing that's meaningful? How do I explain at home that this is important? If I am traveling and not doing something meaningful, because with other people take a gap year to study something else, or they work for some non-profit organization or something. But what if you're taking a gap year and not really doing much with it, you know? So you only learn it in hindsight. So at least know that at some point you'll get to look back and say, okay, maybe I needed this gap year to happen. But yeah, I am definitely for gap years.
And so I think we'll move to the second part of that question. What if life gets in the way with your gap year? And I'll start by tackling it a little bit. I will say this one thing. Life gets in the way no matter what stage you're in. Things are always going to arise. And I think different things happen to me throughout my gap years, whether I think the craziest being we're still living in it. COVID happened in the middle of a lot of our gap years. So I think realistically, all it was allowed me to do is be able to adapt better, especially when you get to med school. Like you'll realize all med school for the most part is a learning process. It's in adapting every single day. New things happen. New things will happen as you're a physician. My mentors tell me all the time, like things happen in clinic, right? Like you're in clinic, things are always changing. You don't have tons of time. One of my great mentors always compares it. I mean, he does some trauma because he's an orthopedic surgeon, but he's like, when you're in the midst of it, things are always going to happen. You're not going to always, you have to make quick decisions as a physician. And you have to be comfortable and strong with those decisions when you relate those to your patients. So things are always going to happen in life. Realize that, and you will become stronger because of it. And you will learn how to adapt. And that is a skill set that I think is transferable to everything. So if anybody else wants to continue.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally agree. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. I think that a lot of people get in the mindset of like, I just want to get through all this training as quickly as possible, and then I'll start living my life. And it's hard not to get in that mindset, especially when you're in med school and you're going through it and you're like, I just have to get through the next exam. I just have to make it through this phase and then I'm going to move on. But I try to remind myself all the time, like, this is my life. It's happening right now. And if you don't make time to do the things that you enjoy and your passions outside of your career and your academics, your life's gonna go by you anyway. And I think for me, a lot of people don't take gap years because they're like, then I'm gonna be so old by the time I finish. I don't want to wait that long. But again, you're going to be in your 20s and your 30s and whatever age either way, so you might as well be doing something that you enjoy. And for me, I wanted to take gap years so I could kind of have a more protected time to do the things that I enjoy. Honestly, in my opinion, this might be a little off the wall, but even if you could academically and like in terms of your application get into med school right out of undergrad, I would say don't. I would tell you to take time off either way, even if it's not because you have these big gaps in your application or anything like that. I think that having real life experiences and taking time to do the things that you enjoy or go work in a different career or do research or whatever it might be, there is nothing that can replace that experience. And I feel very strongly about that. And I think that pretty much everybody can benefit from a gap year experience, no matter what it is. There's just nothing that can replace like being out in the real world. And for me, I moved to a different part of the country. I was like, I lived on the East Coast my whole life, so I moved to Kentucky because why not? And that's something that those memories, like nothing will ever replace those memories. And I'm so grateful that I got to do those things. Then I got to spend time with family, even if it was during COVID, and then I got to travel eventually. It's just, I think, so important to take that kind of time to yourself, and especially, you know, if you're on a traditional route and you're in your 20s when you graduate undergrad, why not spend that time doing something crazy? Because you can. I think I don't know. That's what I have to say. I'm very pro gap year, even if you don't have anything glaring in your application. I say take that time and run with it. And it also helps because then you don't have to work on your application while you're actively in school, because that's something that I definitely did not want to do. So there are a lot of reasons to take the time off. So find one that works for you, honestly.
And I think
Yeah.
Caitlin, oh, sorry about that. Caitlin just raised her hands.
Okay, let me just say this quickly. Yeah, with the there's the second question said, like, if there's inconveniences and stuff within your gap year, like what if life happens? And I think it's a good thing that life happens within that gap year, even, especially if it's a gap year that you're taking before medical school, so that you can learn to adapt quickly to things that happen, so that you can learn how to accept things that happen and you don't have any control over. There's that saying, give me coffee for the things that I can fix and wine for the things that I cannot fix. So for you to be able to establish that level of maturity, if I should say, or understanding that a lot of things will happen, but if you cannot control it, this is the time to learn how to then maneuver and just learn why is it happening to me, right? And yeah, I think by the time you get into medical school, life things will happen in medical school still, but you will learn to adapt and stuff like that. So there's another benefit for a gap year in that scenario.
I definitely agree with Juliana and everybody here. I mean, life's going to happen, whether you're in medical school, whether you're outside of medical school. For me, I was a reapplicant, so I initially applied the 2020-2021 cycle while finishing up my senior year of college. Reapplied during my gap year, and it's definitely, for me, it was a lot easier because I had more time to apply myself to the application process, retake the MCAT. But for me, I was able to get married during my gap year, which I'm very thankful for, because I was able to plan it out, get married, go on the honeymoon, and really enjoy the time that I've spent with my husband. And then I have friends who have had babies before medical school. So I guess my biggest advice would be make sure that you're building a good support system during this time, and make sure that you're spending time with friends, family, because once you get into medical school, you're not going to have as much free time. And then if you have that support system built, they'll be able to help you out during tough times during school.
And I think we'll move to our next question. So I'll kind of combine these two. How can you make sure you have a productive gap year? And what opportunities will help set you apart while taking a gap year?
I think Juliana mentioned something about like were you saying you don't necessarily have to have like a plan, even if you do have a good application coming fresh out of undergrad? That would be a great position to be in, go out and do something that's going to make you grow as a person. But if you do have weaknesses that you know of, I would say it's important to get those addressed. If you're short on clinical hours or shadowing or something, try to address those weaknesses first and then do the other things that are gap year related.
I also would say, honestly, try not to think of it as like finding ways to stand out, because there are tens of thousands of people whose applications are being read next to yours. You're not going to do anything that no one else has ever done before. So there are a lot of traditional things, like Emily was saying, fill the gaps if you have gaps in your application, no matter what that might be. And if there's not anything like glaring, just find something that even if there is, find something that you're passionate about and that you genuinely want to do. Not everything is going to be the most fun thing in the world. Like, I don't love clinical research, so if I had to do that to kind of like fill a gap, that wouldn't have been my favorite thing, but I would have done it to boost my application. There are a lot of different opportunities that are a little bit less traditional. Like, I did my service year with AmeriCorps. People do things like Teach for America, Peace Corps. There's a lot of different programs out there. So if there's something like, if you're not particularly interested in doing a more traditional research type program or a post-bac or a master's or things like that, there are so many different opportunities out there. So I think in terms of doing things for your application, first step is the gaps, and then kind of pick something that really aligns with your interests, because ultimately if it's something you're interested in, you'll be able to speak about it in a more passionate way, and that really comes across to admissions committees.
And I'll just say one last thing on it. I think we are so focused and hyper focused in our pre-med and our med years of productivity. Productivity, especially like is fine and all, and like yes, fill all those gaps, but the experiences are kind of what you're going to need when you're talking about your application, because we're all going to do, like, no matter what, people's CV structure, they look the same, people know how to fill them. There's no like, everybody knows that, right? Like everybody knows when people are doing the CV fillers, like people laugh, like, oh, you did this, yeah. But the experiences that you can speak to are what somebody's going to remember while they're interviewing you, right? They're not going to remember. They may remember some small fact, oh, they did this, but they're going to remember, oh, they have this story, or they've had these stories that they can reflect on, and that's what sets you slightly apart, right? Like you have the ability to tell that story. And I will move us along to the next question. How do I decide whether or not I should take a gap year?
I'll start off by saying if you're questioning taking a gap year, that probably means that you should take a gap year. I can only speak for my program, but I just really can't stress enough like how rigorous medical programs are. And, you know, arming yourself with the knowledge of knowing to an extent that you can as a pre-med of what you're getting yourself into is critical in choosing if you should enter medicine as a physician or in any other capacity or even a different field completely. So there, I would also sort of echo what Juliana said. I'm very, very pro gap year. I feel like there's a minority of cases where people are able to really be confident and successful enough in their application to apply nowadays directly out of undergrad into medical school. So if you're thinking about taking a gap year, I would just sit down and say, one, is my application reflective enough of me and my skills to show to an admissions committee just on paper to get me an interview? That's one thing I would really be introspective about. And again, like we've talked about, reflecting back on previous conversations, filling in those holes. The second one is to really sit yourself down and say, why do I want to enter medicine as a physician? That's a very important question to ask yourself. If you don't have a real world experience and seeing what the day-to-day life of medicine is, and this isn't just shadowing a doctor for a one-off opportunity or even for a few days, or like knowing a aunt who's a doctor, like this is having experience of really knowing what the intricacies of functioning in medicine is, then I also would really implore you to try to pursue opportunities in any capacity that's going to show you the real life of medicine. Because in a lot of situations, medicine is not pretty. So if you don't know that going into it, admissions committees are really going to be able to sniff that out like sharks with blood in the water, because at the end of the day, they're interviewing thousands and thousands of students, and they're making a huge financial commitment on you as a medical student and an investment. So they want to make sure that you have a very realistic view of what the real world of medicine is. So if your experiences aren't able to reflect that you have a really good or solid understanding of that, I would also suggest trying to pursue opportunities by taking gap years, year or years that might sort of fill in that knowledge base for you.
I second that. I have worked with plenty of individuals who started working as a medical assistant who wanted to go into medical school, and they start working there and they're like, oh, this isn't for me. I don't want to do this anymore. Medicine is not pretty. You know, there are days where like I work in family medicine that I get to work with very cute pediatric patients who just make my day. But there's also days that patients, they take your frustration out on you. Insurances deny medications. You know, they tell patients they have to take X, Y, and Z, even though, you know, the physician knows that they're going to fail those medications. So there are a lot of frustrating moments in medicine, but getting clinical experience and exposing yourself to those now in your gap years, that really just helps you prepare. And also just speaking with medical students who didn't have clinical experience beforehand. Once they interact with their first patients in medical school, it's definitely a new experience because you do have to learn how to speak with them and interact with them and be able to empathize with them. So if you're questioning, should I do a gap year? I think all of us here would recommend one, just because you do gain so many beneficial experiences that you can speak to the admissions committee about. You can say, I interacted with this patient. I was able to help them through this. This showed me that I want to be a physician because of X, Y, and Z. And you can really talk about your experiences in that way.
And then I guess I'll make one last point, which is a tidbit I've got from my mentors during my gap years. He actually looked at me, and I had two mentors, both my supervisors, both orthopedic surgeons, but one took some gaps in his time, the other didn't. And he kind of looked at both of us and was like, I kind of wish I had the opportunity to take gaps. He was a finance major, so he'd always looked at it as like, if I take a gap, I'm losing out on the possible physician income and things like that. Like, and I'm like, most gap jobs don't pay a ton. I'm not going to be very honest with you guys. Like, it's not like there's a huge pay discrepancy as you go through medicine. You'll see you go from being a resident, all kinds of things like that. So like from the finances, it is what it is. But it really, at the end of the day, works itself out. Like, don't worry about, like my mentor always like, at the end of the day, all that stuff. And if you're also going into medicine for money, like it's not the lucrative. Like there's so many other things. I have plenty of friends who make tons more money and it's not for that. And by that point, like you will be fine. Like you will come out on top. You will be able to pay back loans. You will be able to do things as long as you learn good financial habits. And one of the ways to learn good financial habits, like brought up by Hunter, I think earlier, was to take that gap year, right? Like I learned so much. You learn if some people in college aren't even filing taxes, you learn what that's like. You learn about, I was able to buy a house. I learned that type of fiscal responsibility. So you learn so much more things. So I will say that. And I'll take us to our next question, which is, how is it like studying for the MCAT after being out of school for some time? How should I spend time studying for my MCAT during that time?
I can start off with this one because I had to retake the MCAT, so I ended up taking it 3 times, and the last 2 were during my gap years. I was working full time, so it was hard. Like there's no sugarcoating it, guys. Like again, like medicine is gonna be hard. Like I'm even thinking back like to 2 years ago at this time when I was relearning how to read to take the card section, like that was hard. Like there's no way around it. But at the end of the day, it's like one of those things for me. So glad I did it. I'm so glad that I actually like retook it to get a better score, because some people will get like an okay score and be okay with that, and that's fine. Like if you can get into medical school with like an okay score, but for me, I'm really glad like I ended up retaking it and tried to achieve a better score, because like that shift in mindset, that like what it took to do that, like something that definitely translated into medical school, like those kind of study habits. But again, it wasn't easy, like I had to get up early before work to read a CARS passage every day, like that kind of stuff, like so it's hard but worth it. I'll leave it at that.
I agree. I had to retake my MCAT a second time, and I was working full time as well. I think the best advice is create a study plan, but don't create a rigid study plan. Because as we mentioned earlier, life does get in the way. So make sure there's room for the schedule to be flexible. I personally used Blueprint, which I really liked because they had like an online calendar through their program that was very flexible that I could rearrange. But you do have to be determined and motivated, and you do have to stay focused to make sure that you're studying effectively and using your time wisely. But it definitely does help create the study habits that you do want in medical school, because you will be very busy, very limited time. So working full time and studying for the MCAT, I think, was beneficial. It is hard, but you can do it.
And one thing I'll just add to what I was saying before too, like all this, it's all of this is almost like connected in a way. Like, so again, like when I decided to take a gap year, like I don't think I was ever like, I took pre-med classes, but I didn't have those experiences where I necessarily knew I was 100% in on medicine. But then like once I had that experience and I realized, oh, like this is obviously what I want to do, then everything kind of falls into place afterwards. Like then I started studying for the MCAT, and then once you have that like plan A, 100% like I'm in on this mentality, like everything else starts to fall into place. So then you start doing well on your MCAT, then you have those experiences so you can write about it on your application. I think again, that's like the biggest thing. I mean, we've all been kind of echoing like this same point, like what the gap year kind of does for you. But someone mentioned it before as well, like as far as like introspection, like have it, like that's something that is not talked about a lot, like something that I never got from advisors before. But having that time to really think, like sit down, like what do I want to do with my life? That's something that's really important. And once you figure that out, it's awesome. And then you can give your full energy towards what you want to do. And if that's medicine, then you can absolutely do it. But yeah, it definitely makes it easier once you know that, and having the time to do that is important to figure that out, I guess.
I wanted to say something really quick. When Kaylin was saying that she used Blueprint for a study schedule, if you all have a subscription to Osmosis, is everyone familiar with that? It's kind of like a learning platform. They also have a schedule builder, because I was going to buy a subscription to Blueprint and I was looking around on Osmosis and they have something similar. So if you have Osmosis, they do have that feature to build a study schedule.
And I will actually take us to one of the questions from somebody who's on the call. They asked, to those who are DO med students, do you feel being in DO versus MD has taken away any opportunities or made gaining opportunities harder? I know things have been changing over the years, and I myself know very successful DOs, but I'm just curious to hear about the experiences of DO students.
Oh, sorry, can you guys hear me? My connection's like really bad in my parents' house right now. But I definitely can speak to this. So I had no hesitations going to a DO school, only because I sort of had a realistic goal of what I wanted for myself in medicine. So just as a blanket statement, with a medical degree, anything is possible in terms of specialties, not necessarily in terms of institutions, but being a DO in certain instances is going to require a lot more work to meet certain goals. So, for example, again, I go to KCU, we have people who match in orthopedics every year, ophthalmology, we typically have a derm match every year. So that shows that it's possible, but it requires a lot more work to get there. Something I also think a lot of people don't know about DO programs is because most of them aren't associated with a home hospital affiliation sort of program. We don't have a lot of in-house, at least in my medical school, we don't have a lot of in-house specialists. So we typically have a lot of primary care physicians, but we don't really have a lot of exposure or access to fields that might be outside of family med and IM really, especially at my program. The second thing is a DO program is going to actually add on a bit more work to your training, and not saying, that we're working harder than other medical students. That's not what I'm saying, but just the fact that OMM is a requirement at DO schools. My DO school, one of the reasons why I chose it is because it has a lower OMM sort of cap, if you will, per week. So we only spend 4 hours on OMM a week. But outside of that, we're consistently having technique practicals where we're having to study and prepare for 80 different moves or techniques to be tested on one of them, which requires a lot of work. We also have other examinations that are particularly focused on our osteopathic portion of our curriculum. So definitely be aware of that if you're thinking about a DO program. And also definitely think, especially at those DO programs that don't have a home institution, about rotations. This is something that a lot of DO schools like to sort of sweep under the rug, but rotations at DO schools can be extremely variable. I know that at my program, although the wide majority of it is fine, we have people who are following non-physician practitioners. We have people who are following family medicine doctors for their OB-GYN rotations. So really, if you're thinking about a DO program, I would say prioritize what you want to sort of how you want to exist in medicine. Can you see yourself wanting to do something a little bit more procedural and a little bit more competitive? Or can you see yourself doing something a little bit more primary care focused? Second aspect of that is really try to find out as much information as you can about the clinical rotation opportunities from actual students, because a lot of the times, and this is especially true at my program, they'll just sort of tell you what you want to hear if you're a non-student inquiring about these things. And third thing I would say is, if you are going to a DO school, be prepared to move around constantly during your third and fourth years. Because we don't have a home institution, like I mentioned, at least at my program, you can be dispersed anywhere around the country. A lot of times, those are places that students won't necessarily like to live in. And although you might have things that tie you to a certain location, like family, like a wife, like kids, that's not a guarantee for you to stay in that location. So to sort of summarize that, just because I'm in medical school in Kansas City does not mean that I'm going to have the opportunity to stay in Kansas City for my clinical rotation. So this can have implications if you want to be in a particular area of the country, if you want to start getting mentorships through research or other clinical experiences in your particular geographic location of your school. So there's definitely a lot of nuances to being into a DO program and to a lot of challenges. I'll sort of summarize it with saying, like, I don't regret going to a DO program. I do think that all the doors that are open to all medical students are also all open to me. But as a DO student, in some aspects of medicine, it does require a little bit more work to achieve the same goals, if that makes sense.
And then one thing I'll add about DO versus MD is one thing that's really big to consider is step one, going past fail. And what that means is, so you don't have the chance to prove yourself for a step, but then at the same time, it is making people choose the local DO over an out-of-state MD school. So like at my school, I was looking, they just shared with us the match placements for what hospital systems are the students are matching in. For me, I'm looking at IM, which is pretty, which I want to specialize in the future. And then that for a DO, compared to going to like a really competitive specialty, I go IM and then fellowship into something else. And one thing that I'm seeing is a lot of these residency programs tend to really like their local students. So there's this small trend that's happening where people are choosing the local medical student as opposed to someone that is out of state, because when it comes time for my rotations, every rotation is acting like an audition rotation, because I do want to practice where I go to medical school. I want to practice in LA. So every rotation is somewhat in the LA area for me. Or if it isn't, it's going to be close to the LA area. So that is something to really think about when it comes time for choosing between DO versus the MD, is the location and how residencies are looking at trying to see someone that connects with the local area, that they live in the area. So that would help with their patient interaction. That is a small factor that is happening. And yes, you have to just focus on your application a lot more as a DO, but I think everyone is. That's the thing. It's hard to match into ENT, optho, ortho, anywhere you go. Like, it is going to be a little easier at MD, but that does not mean that it is not hard. It is just the fact of the matter that they're still competitive, and they're going to keep getting more and more competitive as years go on, whether you are MD or a DO. So you just have to be more realistic about your time and what you try to do with it and what your plans are for the future. Because I could have gone to like an out-of-state school, but I thought my family, being nearby family, being nearby a place where I'm comfortable in, did make a huge difference in how I adjusted to medical school. Because rather than going to a new place, having to understand what the area is like, versus somewhere I'm like, okay, I know where something nearby is, I'm somewhat close to an area where I know, that did have a huge factor in why I chose DO over MD.
And I will just briefly add, I know we've been talking, I want to give some time for some more questions, and I see, thanks Juliana for the message in the chat. We can talk more about this at the next event too. But I'll just finish this off as saying, if you like, I applied to both. I understood I want to be a physician, and you can do it both ways. So for me, it was, and I'm also like, I mean, I was like interested in OMM, like that's something like I want to do sports medicine, so there's definitely like some application to it. I will so again, we can talk more about this, but you guys covered it pretty good. But take home point, it shouldn't deter you from applying DO. Like if you know that you want to be a physician, and I would hesitate to only wanting to be an MD physician. I think that is heading down a kind of dangerous route for yourself, like because it gets like, so why would you like, you're almost prioritizing prestige over like wanting to do the role, you know, like at the end of the day there's a lot of similarities. Again, we can talk more about it, but it shouldn't deter you from applying to DO schools, is my opinion of it.
And I just want to make sure if there are any outstanding questions. I don't have any other questions from people on the call. If there are any outstanding questions, people can unmute, ask them now, send them to me. But I just want to make sure we get any last questions answered.
I am from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Rachel. I went to high school in Texas and then college at Lubbock Christian University. So yeah.
Somebody asked about OPT for international students and how was that used as a gap year?
Alex, you broke up a little bit in the first part.
Okay, so somebody was asking about OPT, and I'm not necessarily sure what that abbreviation is, but how that was used for as a gap year for international students.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that is either.
If they want to unmute and explain to us what OPT is, maybe we can help them out a little bit more.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi. So an OPT is an optional training program. So for international students on their F1 visa, we have 2 years after finishing our graduating to work in the US. So I was wondering if there were any international students, if they used that OPT as a gap year, or if they just went into medical school and used that for a clinical experience.
I believe I'm the only international medical graduate here. But I'm from Kentucky. So I'm just like an IMG in terms of like medical school. I'm not from outside the US going to an international medical school and hoping to practice in the US. So I don't think I would be able to help you with that.
Yeah, that's no problem at all. Thank you.
If we don't, sorry, you can go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. No, go ahead. I think because Zemia was gonna try and answer it.
Okay, I was just gonna say also, if we, Kay, you can go ahead and share what information you have, but also we can reach out to the Slack and see if there's anyone who has done a program like that who would be able to help additionally, but Kay, if you have more information, that'd be great.
Just a little. I haven't graduated yet, but I know as an IMG, or IMG meaning after I've graduated, the process that I would have to go through is I would have to have some sort of experience to work abroad, to work in the US. So write my USMLE first, USMLE step 1, while I'm still in school. And step 2, maybe when I'm doing what we call internship. I don't know what you guys call it, but after you've done with your schooling, the first 2 years of your working career, that's what we call internship. Some countries they pay, some don't, but I would have, maybe that's the OTP period for international students, because I know that people who work in the US who are in my position had that 2 years of experience where you either work where you graduated or in your home country, and then you write your step 3 in order to do internship or to do your clerkship in the US. So some people do take gap years in that period where maybe they'll finish their internship and have 1 year of maybe research or 1 year of doing whatever it is they want to do to boost their applications, or to do something out of med school so that it covers the aspect or the question of what did you do outside of med school, right? But yeah, those are the steps that I would need to take as an IMG in order for me to work or even apply to work in the US. So I don't know if that little information might help, but that's literally the process for everyone in my position or people who have graduated ahead of me.
All right, thank you so much.
Any other last questions? Without seeing any, I will say quick plug for our next event in January. We got into some of the discussion a little bit, but we will be diving deep into DO, MD, IMG, and having different breakout rooms for you guys to ask all of those questions and asking mentors to give you their real feedback on what their programs have to offer, the benefits, the deficits, things like that, so you guys can kind of hear that. So please join us in January, and thanks for joining tonight, and I'll let Juliana close.
Yeah, thank you all for coming out tonight. We hope to see you in January.